Caleb Jones, Alpha Male 2.0 podcast. And if you're curious as to the other platforms where we host this podcast, because I've gotten some questions about that, go to calebjones.com/podcast. And we list all the platforms that this podcast is currently hosted on. There's about 8 or 9 of them there, and we're adding several more as we speak. So there's a lot of bitching and complaining, including from me historically, and maybe even lately a little bit, on how beta and how feminine and how left-wing and how low quality modern day pop culture is. As I've talked about many times, the Western world is in a slow state of collapse, and that is not just economic collapse, but that is also cultural collapse. And so, as I pointed out and shown many times, movies are far worse now than they ever have been in my lifetime in terms of quality of movies. Television shows are really bad. There's some indications that written novels are getting worse now. Some of those are still pretty good, to be honest. So a lot of this is affecting movies and television shows, visual and auditory mediums, rather than written medium for some strange reason. I mean, we can speculate about that. And I have done my share about bitching about this. I do a lot less bitching about this now than I have historically, because I've just come to accept that this is just part of the new normal. But today I wanted to talk about something completely different. I wanted to talk about the positive alpha male influences that pop culture has had on me in my life, starting when I was a kid and then later when I was a young man. And I thought that would be interesting to talk about, because I was thinking a lot about this the other day. And I don't know why I was thinking about this. I don't know where. I wonder where our thoughts come from. Well, Caleb, they come from our brains. Yeah, I know, but I wonder where our random thoughts come from. That must come from our subconscious mind. And I just wonder how the subconscious mind decides to just pick out random shit and throw it at us. Like the other day, I started singing some old pop song from like 20 years ago, and I just started singing it, and I didn't hear it anywhere. I was home all day, so I didn't hear it anywhere. It just popped into my brain, and I started singing the song because I'm a psychopath. So my subconscious, for some reason, just said, I'm going to make Caleb sing this song today for no fun. Why did my subconscious decide that? I don't know. I don't know how this works. But anyway, as I've talked about before, I was raised in a very large family. I was the oldest of 5 kids that were raised in the same house anyway. And my mom was the typical housewife back then, somewhat of a submissive. My dad was a mild alpha male 1.0. And I think I might have mentioned this before. I looked up to him in certain respects, but not in others. He was not a pure alpha male, and I didn't actually meet any real alpha males until I met my karate teacher, Alan, who I mentioned on a podcast a while back. So other than him, even after him, I never really encountered any real life alpha males until way into my adulthood. And so I had to look to other sources in my life for alpha male influences, positive alpha male influences. Now today, usually when an alpha male is shown in a movie or a TV show, he is shown as a negative. He's shown as a doofus, or he's shown as a monster. I wrote an article years ago comparing the old James Bond, the Sean Connery James Bonds in the 60s and early 70s, comparing the alpha male of that character to alpha males in the last 20 years in movies. And alpha males, in the last 20 years, I compared that, I believe, to the movie Wedding Crashers, where Wedding Crashers established a new formula for alpha male movies, where you have a character or 2 characters who start out as alpha males, and it shows how silly and immature and goofy and stupid they are. And that by the end of the movie, they have fallen in love and gotten married, or fallen in love and found the woman for them, and they become beta males. So a lot of movies today, and in the last 25 years, the alpha male starts out as an alpha, but ends up as a beta by the end of the movie. And that is very different from the 60s and 70s, where the alpha male was just as alpha at the end of the movie as he was at the beginning of the movie. And that was shown as a good thing, not a bad thing. The rare times alpha males are shown as alphas at the end of the movie, it's shown as a bad thing. It shows them either getting killed or fucked in a bad way, or very lonely and sad, things like that. But anyway, I had to look for alpha male role models on TV and then later in movies. So the 3 alpha male characters that I glommed onto as a kid, and I really glommed onto these three guys. The third one was the most important, but the first two and then the third one, all around the same time in my life when I was a kid, around, let's see, the late 70s, early 80s, because I was born in 72. So usually you grow up in the decade after in which you were born. So if you're born in the 70s, you were raised in the 80s. If you're born in the 80s, you weren't raised in the 80s, you were raised in the 90s, and that's where you base your life from. So it's usually the decade after you were born. So my dad was born in the 40s, but he was raised in the 50s. So I was born in the 70s, but I was raised in the 80s. I remember a little bit of the 70s, not much. I was a little kid back then. But toward the end of the 70s and early 80s, my first three role models were, in this order, Captain Kirk on TV on Star Trek, the original 1960s Captain Kirk, Han Solo in the Star Wars movies, and then shortly after that, Indiana Jones in the Indiana Jones movies. And of course, Indiana Jones and Han Solo were both portrayed by the same actor, Harrison Ford. And let's start with Captain Kirk first. So Captain Kirk, to me, was the perfect man. He was the way that I wanted to be when I was a kid watching him. I would go home from school every day, and we had a little tiny black and white TV, and I was, all the kids were younger than me. I was the oldest of these five kids, so I would turn on the black and white TV. I think Star Trek came on at 6 p.m. every night, and I would watch every Star Trek episode, and by the time it got to the end of the seasons, it started over, and I would rewatch the entire series. I probably watched the entire Star Trek series at least twice, probably 3 times over as a child. And it's interesting because I was watching, and I didn't know this at the time, this was probably 1978, 1977, somewhere in there. So little did I know, I was watching a series that it was already 10 plus years old and had gone off the air over 10 years ago, because that was a series from the mid 1960s. Now, I didn't know this as a kid. I had no idea. And one of the big reasons I watched Star Trek, not only because it was science fiction, and I love science fiction and fantasy, it's my two favorite genres. Not only did I watch it because that, but I watched it because of Captain Kirk. And to me, as a kid, everything he did was perfect. The way he handled his problems was perfect. The way he got into fights, the way he would physically move in fights when he would punch guys looked cooler than anything else I had ever seen in any other fight scenes, in any other TV show, in any other movie. Honestly, seriously, I can still visualize Captain Kirk grabbing a guy and holding up his fist and someone saying, "No, Captain, stop." And he would freeze kind of in that pose. And I'm like, God, he looks cool. He looks so, how does he know how to fight so cool? How did William Shatner know how to do that? I have no idea. And even when Captain Kirk got mad, because he got mad a lot, he was, somewhat outcome dependent. By the way, this is, decades before Alpha Male 1.0, Alpha Male 2.0, Beta Male. I didn't know any of these concepts. I was a little kid, so I didn't know any of this stuff. But when he got angry, I found that I agreed with all the reasons he got angry. Now, of course, I'm a little kid, so I'm looking up to this guy as kind of this fantasy figure, but I just loved watching Captain Kirk. And later as a teenager and as a young man in my 20s, when I would rewatch certain episodes of Star Trek, I would feel the exact same way. Like, goddamn, Captain Kirk is so fucking perfect. Goddamn. And what's interesting is that he was not an imposing figure physically. He was actually kind of short. And in some respects, he was a little pudgy. He wasn't fat, but he wasn't ripped like they later became in the 80s, the Schwarzenegger, Stallone era, which I'll talk about in a second. He was a little pudgy. But he was really, really good looking. All the girls I went to school with all would talk about, oh, Captain Kirk, he's so hot. And later, of course, my own daughter would watch Star Trek and go, oh my God, Captain Kirk was so hot. Yeah. There was an old joke that Eddie Murphy talked about where Captain Kirk is the coolest white man to ever exist. Probably true. So that was my first alpha male role model, and I remembered a lot from him. The next alpha male role model was Han Solo in Star Wars. This one's a little more short-lived. Han Solo was just cool. He wasn't perfect and amazing like Captain Kirk, but he was just cool. And I had never seen someone cool until I ran into my next alpha male role model, and I'm going to insert this in here, and that would be Fonzie on the TV show Happy Days. So it's not quite as intense as Star Trek, but I would watch Happy Days a lot in the 70s because that was a current show that was running in the 70s. I would watch a lot of Happy Days episodes. And Fonzie was the epitome of cool, but when I watched Han Solo was more of a natural cool. Whereas Fonzie, if you're a young man, you probably don't even know who the fuck Fonzie is, or maybe you've heard of him. You know, you kind of visualize a picture of him, but you probably have never watched an episode of Happy Days. And I don't know if those episodes age very well. If you don't know what Happy Days is, if you're not an American, Happy Days was a very, very popular TV show in America in the 1970s, set in the 50s. It was a sitcom comedy. And Fonzie was the cool, good-looking guy with the black leather jacket who fucked all the girls. And he had like magical powers. He could like bang on a door and it would magically open by itself and unlock because he was Fonzie, because he was just cool, that kind of thing. And so I could tell even as a kid, the coolness of Fonzie was forced. He was trying to be cool and trying to act cool, which was still cool as a little kid. But Han Solo wasn't trying to be cool. He just was cool. And what was interesting about Han Solo was that he had a lot of flaws. Unlike Captain Kirk, who was almost perfect, Han Solo had flaws. And I remember at the time not liking some of those flaws. I was jealous of Han Solo because he made out with Princess Leia, and I had a huge crush on Princess Leia, like most men in my generation, the mid-Generation X did at that time. So, but that was another big alpha male role model for me. And then finally, my ultimate alpha male role model from my childhood and even bleeding into my early adulthood came along, and that was Indiana Jones. And I will never forget this day when I was a kid. So this was 1981, I believe. I think that's when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out. Almost positive it was 1981, back when movies were good. And matter of fact, you can look at an article at the Caleb Jones blog. I wrote an article on 1982, which was probably one of the best years for movies in all of human history. And I just cover 1982, and I just make a list of movies that came out in 1982. And the list of the quality of that list is staggering. You just can't believe it. And I remember seeing all those movies in the movie theater in 82, and I didn't know at the time how lucky I was to live in this golden era of Hollywood. But anyway, 1981, I was sitting at my dining room table for my family. 1981, how old was I? I was born in 72, so I was 9 years old. And back then we had things called newspapers. I know you never heard of those. We had things called newspapers back then. This is before the internet. This is even before personal computers in people's homes. So only rich people could afford computers, and they were terrible. So we didn't have a computer. So we were paging through the newspaper, and I would always go to the movie section of the newspaper because that would tell you what all the new movies were and when they were coming out and all that good stuff. It was 2 or 3 big pages. And I turned the page, and they had purchased the entire page of the newspaper, the Oregonian, back in 1981, the entire page, what they rarely did. And it was this new movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark. And on the picture was an iconic picture now, a picture of Indiana Jones. And to me, I'm just sitting there going, there's this, it's a cowboy? It's a cowboy movie? Why did they buy out an entire page just for a cowboy movie? That's kind of weird. Okay, well, whatever. And my dad walked by as I was looking at this, and he knew how much I loved Han Solo. And I did not recognize who this person was. This cowboy with the scruffy hair and the bullwhip and the leather jacket. And he said, you know who that is? I said, no, it's a cowboy. He's like, no. You know exactly who that is. Take a good look. And I looked at the guy's face. I'm like, yeah, he looked a little familiar. I said, who is it? And my dad said, that's Han Solo. And I went, and I looked at it again, and then I saw it. I went, oh my fucking God. Han Solo is going to be a fucking cowboy? What the hell? We got to see this movie. Then I found out that this movie was created by George Lucas, the same guy that made Star Wars, and Steven Spielberg, the same guy who made Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was a really cool movie for me back when I was a kid, and Jaws, which I had never seen because it was too scary because I was young, but I knew about Jaws. I understood what Jaws was. And I went, oh my God, we got to see this. So we went and saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Raiders of the Lost Ark it is the most important movie of my entire life. Probably not my favorite movie. My favorite movie is probably the 3 Lord of the Rings movies, the extended versions mashed all together, if you consider that one movie, which I kind of do. So if you take the extended versions of all 3 Lord of the Rings movies and mash them together, you end up with this like 12.5-hour long movie. That's probably my favorite movie of all time. But a very close second is Raiders of the Lost Ark. And Raiders of the Lost Ark is a more important and pivotal movie for me. Back when I was a kid, we didn't have internet. We didn't have Netflix. We did not even have VCRs. Again, only rich people could afford those. We weren't rich. So I went back and saw that movie in the movie theater 5 times. You had to do that back then because once a movie left the theaters, you could never see it again. Maybe if you were really lucky, 6 or 7 years later, they would play it on TV with commercials. If you were lucky, the vast majority of movies they did not do that with. So if you liked a movie, you had to go see it once or twice. This was the only movie I've ever seen in my entire life 5 times in the movie theater. I saw it 5 times. I lived and breathed and sweat and slept that movie. And it's interesting today that there are a lot of parallels now between me and Indiana Jones. But Indiana Jones was the quintessential alpha male role model for me as a kid. Not only how he behaved, not only what he wanted, but the way he lived, the way he traveled, the way he could kind of do whatever he wanted, the way he kind of set his own agenda, even though technically he had a job. But for some reason, his bosses let him do whatever he want, including kill people, which as an adult, I thought was interesting. But anyway, that was the biggest alpha male role model probably of my entire life. And certainly of my childhood was Indiana Jones. And yes, I liked the latter 2 Indiana Jones movies, Temple of Doom and Last Crusade, although they weren't as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark. There was something missing. There's an edge to those 2 movies that are missing that Raiders of the Lost Ark has. Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of those rare, perfect movies. I just watched it again last year, and I loved every minute of it. It's a perfect movie. It's the kind of movie they can't make anymore. They can't make Raiders of the Lost Ark anymore. They can't move it. They can't make it. They're not allowed to. They're not allowed to, and they don't know how. Both. So you'll never see a good movie like that to that quality ever again. Raiders of the Lost Ark, you just won't. Yes, there was a 4th movie. I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. So I'm not going to talk about that. So then moving on, when I got into high school, when I got older, that's when I leaned heavily into Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Steven Seagal, the big, buff, corny action movies of the 80s. Jean-Claude Van Damme, although I didn't really like him very much, but I saw his movies. Chuck Norris, certainly him. Who else? There was a guy named Jeff Speakman. He was good. I liked him. Who else? Now, he's in a different category, but on TV, I watched Knight Rider, so I watched Michael Knight. I watched the A-Team on TV. Those are all, talk about alpha males. The A-Team, the original A-Team TV show in the 80s. 4 different alpha males, all very different. But all 4 of those characters were alphas. Even the crazy guy was an alpha male. Great show. Even though no one ever died, and no one ever got hurt, and there was never any blood. I hated that because I was a little older for it at the time. But anyway, I leaned hard into the strong 80s action movie alphas of the 1980s. And later, as an adult, matter of fact, I talked about this on the Caleb Jones blog many years ago when the Expendables movies came out and they gathered together all these people. It was a really fun experience for me, even though those movies are pretty corny. But I actually own all 3 of those movies just because of, nostalgia reasons. Because again, you really don't see guys like this in movies anymore, minus movies like Fast and Furious. But those movies are really cartoons. Unfortunately, alpha male movies, the few alpha male movies you got where alpha males are portrayed in a positive light are kind of cartoony. Not kind of cartoony. I mean, the Fast and Furious movies essentially are cartoons. They're unwatchable at this point. Fast and Furious, really quick as a side note, and that's interesting. The first 4 movies were boring and stupid because they were about cars. Then they rebooted it with Fast 5, the 5th movie, which was really good. So Fast and Furious 5, really good. Fast and Furious 6, really good. Those are where it peaked. Then Fast and Furious 7 is, it starts getting really stupid. And then by, the rest they're just stupid as shit. So the Fast and Furious series, in my opinion, kind of peaked at 5 and 6, and then it was downhill from there. But all the alpha male action guys from the 80s, Kurt Russell, there was another one. Kurt Russell, oh, he was the shit. God damn. Both of the Escape from New York movie is much better than Escape from LA, but Escape from LA is all right. The first 3 or 4 Steven Seagal movies before he kind of went insane. So his first movie, Above the Law, pretty cool. Okay. Good for the time, I guess, was fine. But then you had Hard to Kill, which was like super ultra corny Steven Seagal at his corniness. And it's a great movie. It's so dumb and so great. God, it's great. It's not cartoony. It's just he thinks he's so cool. He's hilarious. That's the movie where he has the famous line where the senator on TV who has his wife killed, he's like, and you can take that to the bank. And he turns the TV and says, I'll take you to the bank, Senator. The blood bank. And then the music goes dun, 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 dun. And you're like, This is so corny, it's awesome. And then Marked for Death, which was all right. And then what was the one he did on the ship? Under Siege. Fantastic movie. What a great movie. Under Siege 2, by the way, Steven Seagal, which is like 91. Now we're slipping into the 90s. Also a very good movie. That was his last good movie. Every Steven Seagal movie he ever did after that was pretty terrible, other than maybe Exit Wounds, which was kind of a comedy. So R.I.P. Steven Seagal. The last good alpha male movie probably was Terminator 2, which was 1991. And as I've written about in my books, the 90s was when the baby boomer generation started taking over society. That is a hard left generation. And so the culture changed. Matter of fact, Arnold Schwarzenegger in his autobiography wrote a whole section about that, how when he did his movie The Last Action Hero, he realized that everything was shifting to the political left in the 90s, and action heroes were changing. So instead of having guns attached to any of his toys, they would just punch. They'd have funny punches and make funny catchphrases. He said guns were cool in the 80s, but now that it's the 90s, I knew I couldn't do that anymore. No more guns. So everything got very milquetoast in the 90s. And as I've written about in my books, the big, strong guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Stallone, Dolph Lundgren, these big, massive motherfuckers were replaced by action heroes, quote unquote heroes in the 90s, by skinny, dorky guys like Keanu Reeves and Nicolas Cage and shit like that. Not that they are terrible people or terrible actors, but it was just a different type of action hero. And that was kind of the end of me looking for pop culture for alpha male role models or positive alpha male influences. Maybe not role models, but to be honest about that, in terms of role models, even to this day, and this sounds strange for people who are not in my generation, Generation X, but it's true, I consider both Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, these men in real life, as real role models. Arnold Schwarzenegger, as I've talked about several times before, is arguably the single most successful man in modern history if you account for all the different areas in which he became successful. So first he became successful, literally top of the world successful in bodybuilding. Then he became a multimillionaire in the business world through mail order. Then he became a multimillionaire again through real estate investing. He made millions of dollars in real estate. Then he became the highest paid actor in all of human history in Hollywood. See how different these things are? And he reached the top. Then he became governor of California. I mean, just one huge, massive number one top spot win after the next in all of these different areas. So he is absolutely a role model, minus one or two mistakes he's made in his personal life, which I've talked about in my blogs. You can go look up those articles if you want. Sylvester Stallone, in my opinion, in a way, is even a better role model because Sylvester Stallone is a perfect role model for work ethic. This guy works like you would not believe. And he is a role model to me in terms of not only working hard and achieving your objectives against odds, which is what he's done his whole life, but also aging. He's starting to look a little old now, but he's well into his 70s. I think he's in his late 70s now, or maybe his mid 70s. But at 70 and late 60s, he looked better than most guys do in their 40s or even 30s. He was ripped and perfect and looked great. And I just, my hat's off to the guy. So Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, in my opinion, are actual real role models. And for anyone who says, oh, those are just dumb actors, you haven't studied these two gentlemen and you have not looked at their lives and you have not evaluated what they've done with their lives. I have read the biographies and autobiographies of both these men, and I consider them role models. They're not my only role models. I got a lot of them. But in terms of alpha male role models from pop culture, not only could I enjoy their movies from the 80s when they were shooting guys and killing guys, which is fun, but I can also appreciate them as real people, which is kind of neat, which again, not something you can really do these days, although there are exceptions. I think Dwayne Johnson is certainly someone you could put in that category. So I should probably backtrack that statement. Dwayne Johnson is someone you can look up to in terms of grinding, working hard, setting objectives, achieving your goals. Another guy, frankly, who is not an alpha male role model for me at all, but is an example of someone who works very hard and accomplishes goals against all kinds of odds is Kevin Hart. Very impressive what he's accomplished. Very impressed with him. So yeah, I guess we're not bereft of role models today in pop culture, but they're few and far between as compared to when I was growing up in the 80s and early 90s. Today, in terms of pop culture, and I've mentioned this before, The guys who I think are cool in terms of watching them in movies and TV shows, what few there are, and there really aren't anymore, but in the last, 5, 10, 15 years are, in my opinion, this is who I really enjoy, old alpha males. Maybe because I'm old, maybe because I'm in my 40s. Old alpha males. So that would be guys like Kevin Costner. I don't mean Kevin Costner in the 80s. I hated Kevin Costner in the 80s. I thought he was milquetoast and lame. Couldn't stand him. But Kevin Costner in movies now, he's done several movies last 10 years as an old bastard that are really good. That are really, really good. He did one a while ago called Criminal. Fantastic. Another one called 3 Days or 3 Days and 3 Nights. Great character. Great guy to watch. Another one is Pierce Brosnan. Love watching him. Now that he's old, he is far more entertaining and enjoyable to watch on the screen, in my opinion, than he ever was as James Bond when he was in his prime. I don't know what it is about old alpha males. I love watching these guys. Just like I used to love watching Sean Connery in the 90s and early 2000s when he was an old bastard. I love watching him because and talk about a real alpha male in real life. Sean Connery, not a perfect man, made some mistakes in his life, but wow, what a real alpha male that guy was. Holy fucking shit. I felt bad when he died, but that was the end of an era when that guy died. But these days I tend to like old, crusty alpha males. And that kind of parallels my real life because the guys who I look up to now, who I consider mentors for me now, are just about to a T guys over the age of 70. In most cases, very physically fit alpha male dudes in their 70s. I look for examples on how I want to age, and the older you get, the more you think about aging. And so I'm about to turn 49, so I pay very close attention to men in their 70s who have aged very well, who are very physically fit, who are very excited about life, who are like me, or traveling the world and working hard because they want to, not because they need to. These are men who are very wealthy and just, have missions and goals and just are living a great life. Even the ones who are, unfortunately, are monogamous, usually on wife number 2 or 3, because long-term monogamy doesn't work, but fine, whatever. So that's really it. What I might do one of these days, I think it might be a fun thing to do, is to take a particular movie and analyze that movie from an alpha male standpoint. Maybe either do that as a podcast or as a YouTube video, or even as, and I even thought about this, even doing a audio commentary track that you could play as you watch the movie. I might even do that. Maybe that'd be fun to do. I don't know. I've been thinking about it. The movie I think I would do that with first would be the movie Memento, starring Guy Pearce, which is a Christopher Nolan movie. That movie is a masterpiece. Very interesting alpha male movie to analyze, in both for good things about alpha males and negatives of alpha males. So maybe Raiders of the Lost Ark would be a good one too. There's so many movies we could do this with. So I don't know. Let me know in the comments if that's something you would be interested in me doing, and maybe I will consider doing it. But in the meantime, I will see you next week. Have fun. Bye.